When it comes to self-development, no matter the method you use, the vital point is to practice. If you want to learn methods to transform your life and actively grow into the potential you know is inside of you, then you're in the right place. Welcome to The Vital Point. I'm your host, Jonathan Schecter. I'm a psychedelic integration and transformation coach, breathwork facilitator, and an enthusiast of personal growth. You have the capacity to evolve and bring your intentions and dreams into the world, and there's never been more access to so many incredible modalities that can help you on your journey. This podcast will help you learn about new methods to bring into your life, give you practices to follow, and share stories from practitioners who are doing the work so that you feel inspired to go and practice, because that's the vital point. My guest today, I'm so honored to welcome Conni Biesalski back to the podcast. She's a breathwork facilitator, meditation teacher, and somatic coach who helps people heal and regulate their nervous system, improve their breathing pattern, and come home to their bodies. She's also a writer, creator, photographer, online filmmaker, podcaster, speaker, and entrepreneur, and someone that I am very honored to call a friend. She was one of the first guests on this podcast when I was just getting started last year. And I'm just so grateful to have her back on the podcast. So Conni, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. So we were having a really interesting conversation before we hit record about, your vital points of the breath being the remote control for the nervous system, and sort of the journey that, you've influenced me through in terms of breath work, going through, we met during our neurodynamic breathwork facilitation training. And that was sort of my gateway into breathwork, is the Wim Hof breathing and the neurodynamic breathing. And I thought, coming out of that program, I'm like, wow, breathwork is this doorway into expanded states of consciousness and, a method to hit these psychedelic states without using psychedelics. And it's not that I've completely gone away from that, but, folks like you have helped me see this whole other spectrum of breath work that is so much more grounding, so much more calming. And, I would just love if you wanted to give a brief introduction of what you do and how you consider breath work and the type of breath work that you teach to your clients.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like, so many of us are on this journey. We get hooked on the more activating breathwork practices and the expanded states of awareness that they offer us. And then some of us venture into the vast ocean of just possibilities in breathwork and discover that there's so much more out there. And that's basically how my journey started as well. And with the breath, after having tried out all sorts of modalities to deal with my depression and my anxieties, especially in relationships. And I was struggling for years and years and years in relationships and dating. And also I'd come out late as a queer woman in my late 20s. And so there was a lot of suppressed emotions, a lot of shame still stored in my body. And then, finding myself in a lot of codependent, toxic relationships. And so having been to all the Joe Dispenza retreats and Tony Robbins and having worked with a lot of different psychotherapists and coaches and gone to all the workshops and done all the meditation retreats, and things definitely progressed and got better, but not really sustainably. And I was still really struggling in relationships, and my nervous system was completely dysregulated and fried, so much so that my body was really taking its toll as well. And I was dealing with gut issues, SIBO, and it was bad for several years, and skin issues, and I really wasn't feeling great for several years. And And then I discovered breathwork. I was in LA at the time, 2017 maybe, and heard about holotropic breathwork on a podcast. And then I just Googled it, holotropic breathwork LA, and Michael Stone came up. And I went to one of his intro workshops at his house at the time. And yeah, it just, that whole experience just blew my mind. I mean, even just entering his house and the sound setup that he has there, and the music that he played during the session, and just him himself, like, it was awesome. It was the best intro into this style of breathwork. And yeah, I then eventually found myself in Bali, and breathwork was just sort of taken off there. And I experimented with a ton of different styles and teachers and modalities, and eventually decided to do a training or two or three, actually, as it turned out in the end. But yeah, I also then ventured into the realms of functional breathing, Buteyko, oxygen advantage, breathwork for performance, and really diving deeper into the more regulating practices. So it kind of feels like, after having dived really deep into the transformational style breathwork and explored so many different layers of myself and my psyche and my body and my traumas in those sessions, and they were absolutely life-changing in so many regards, and really, really, and to this day, I mean, I still have my practice. I still breathe, every couple of weeks or so, and do these deep dive sessions. But eventually, I also realized, okay, meditation is great as a daily mindfulness practice, but I felt like I need a better way to regulate my nervous system. And as I started to learn more about the breath and its connection to the nervous system, and becoming more and more aware of the fact that my body's not regulated still, even though I've done all these deep dive sessions and cleared out a lot of emotional stored emotions and stored trauma. Yeah, I felt like there was still something missing, and so I started to integrate these regulating practices into my life, and just starting out with really simple coherence breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, and tracking my heart rate variability, and getting a little bit obsessed with that sort of stuff and tracking everything. And it just, yeah, it was a lot of fun to explore what's out there and how I can use my breath as the remote control for my nervous system, and really understanding the link between them. And so, yeah, just got trained in different modalities, and today I feel like I guess, yeah, I think many people sort of start out in similar ways as you just explained it, and similar along, similar to my journey, and now I'm at a place where my practice is really simple, and the stuff that I teach is quite simple, and I'm also integrating more and more of somatic practices into my work, into my breath meditations, and having worked with myself with a lot of somatic psychotherapists from somatic experiencing and NARM, and just really noticing how important it is that we find our way back home into our bodies, in the way that our bodies feel like a safe home to return to, and learning. And the breath is an amazing way. I find it's a great bridge to find that safety and to practice what we call interoception. So becoming more and more aware of the internal states within our bodies and its signals, and relearning its language in a more subtle way. And so, yeah, I'm in my own personal practice. That's how I combine breathwork and somatics, and becoming more and more gentler, I guess, with myself, and then also in the way that I teach. And I run a teacher training with my partner, sort of combining all of these worlds together in a trauma-informed and nervous system-informed way. And The breath never, I don't know, every day is fascinating. There's more to learn and more to explore, and that's what I love about it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's always more. That's what I felt too, coming out of, our neurodynamic training. I was like, okay, I know about breath work. And then it was, whoa, there's this whole other world, like you're saying, of different techniques, different methods, and really the um, the transformational style of breathing, the breathing where you're, entering these different altered states and really being able to do self-development work or connect to purpose, or really forcefully sometimes remove the somatic blocks or the emotional sort of gunk that's in the body. It's really like, I've come to think of it almost as the top of the pyramid, and without
Mm.
having those lower layers of foundation,
Mm.
to be able to regulate your nervous system, to have awareness of what's happening with the breath and the body. There's only so much that you can do with it,
Mm.
with that transformed state. And there's so much to be said about slowing down, about learning these other types of breathing. I would love to hear more about how you're more about the interoception, and also like how you're incorporating the somatics into your breath work and into your teaching. Because for me, that, somatic work has been super, super influential, and really
Mm.
key to, I feel like, my own healing. And I think there's a lot
Mm.
of value in talking about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, where to start? I think, as I said in the first place, I think the breath serves as a great facilitator to get into our bodies, and that was the case for me. Several years ago, it was I was so disconnected from my body and so disassociated, which is why I needed these more intense breathwork practices to actually feel myself. And so then once I landed more in my body and I felt safer through breathwork to feel my emotions, I could then also start exploring my body outside of these deep dive sessions. And what really helped me was to, well, for one, working with a somatic experiencing therapist, and a NARM therapist is also a somatic therapist, mainly focusing on developmental trauma. And that in itself was a game changer, because in working with somatic psychotherapists, you really got to slow down, because what we normally do in talk therapy is we talk and talk and talk, and we talk about the story, and we're all up here and we try to make sense of things. And whereas when you do somatic psychotherapy, you start talking and you start telling the story, and then they slow you down and they make you feel stuff in your body as you are telling the story. And it's really annoying in the beginning, because I'm used to just talk, and my brain works really fast in that way, and then suddenly they made me stop and get into my body, and I didn't like that. And then they made me ask, so what do you feel as you're talking about that? And I'm like, I don't know. I just couldn't. It was really difficult for me to answer these questions, and so that made me realize, holy shit, am I weird? What's wrong with me? And then I realized, okay, this is a process. And so by doing more of these regulating practices, breathing practices, and exploring more of the somatic mindfulness practices, let it be something like body scan, right? And SDR, non-sleep deep rest protocols, where you're guided into different parts of your body. And again, something I hated doing in the beginning. I just got so bored. I just check out after 3 minutes of feel your right foot, and what sensations can you become aware of, and I think that's really normal. So many of us just can't stay in our body. It's not, we're so adrenalized, and and my norm was being in a very heightened state in terms of activation, and being more in my sympathetic branch of my nervous system activated. And then I had, my it kind of went up and down, and in the downs I was in depression, shut down, and then I just don't feel anything. I don't want to meditate. I don't want to do anything. and but So I found it really hard to drop into my body. But the breath was something that just helped me to slowly get to a place where I could eventually feel, oh, okay, I can do a bit of a body scan a little bit longer now. I can stick with it a little bit longer. Okay, I can do just observing my breath a little bit longer, and a minute longer than before. And so these days, having experimented myself with a lot of different practices, I mean, there's a huge variety, but yes, I use practices like body scan for sure in different variations. I also really like practices like contact points. So just feeling into all the different places where your body touches something else or touches itself. So for example, your eyeballs touching your eyelids from the inside when you're closing your eyes, or your tongue touching your mouth and your upper palate, or your fingers touching each other, your back touching the back of your chair, your feet touching the floor, things like that. That was a huge game changer for me many years ago now, that I learned from a Buddhist teacher of mine. And that was like the first somatic practice actually that calmed me down. I was like, holy shit, that's just mind-blowing contact points. So I love that. And then there's so many, but in the end, it's about learning how to feel sensations in my body and guiding other people in how to stay with them. And the best way I find how to do it is, let it be when we're stressed, when we're angry, whatever, and there's a charge in my body, and learning how to track that charge, and to be with it just for a minute or two maybe. And then also another one that I think is really, really important and underestimated, I think, in its effectiveness, is finding safety anchors in the body. And because a lot of times when we focus on the charge in our bodies, which oftentimes can be really overwhelming, especially if we've experienced trauma. But finding safety anchors in the body, so places in the body that feel pleasant or even just neutral, like just finding a spot in your body that feels neutral, like your knee or your right foot, and also finding places in your environment that feel safe, right? So I noticed that, for example, when I'm orienting in my space, that to find a safety anchor in my space, I really prefer fabrics like a curtain or a blanket or something, rather than like a wall or a lamp or something like a tech gadget or something. And so just that in itself, like looking at the curtains and the texture of that in itself, somatically gives me a sense of safety. And so those are just a few things that I use in my own practice and my own daily life, and then stuff that I integrate into how I guide breath practices and breathing meditations. And I don't want to make too much of a big fuss around these somatic practices. I just integrate them into the breathing meditations. And oftentimes people don't even notice them.
Right.
But in the long run, the feedback is people feel more connected to their bodies, and they can take that awareness from that breathing meditation into their daily life. And
I could totally relate to that. Like, and hearing what you just said, I'm like, oh yeah, I actually felt really good, because I'm like, oh, that's what I do too. It's not like, hey, we're going to do somatic practice, but even just slipping this little bit, 20, 30 seconds, maybe a minute in before you breathe, of like, where do you feel connected to the ground or the earth?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how does it feel to just check in with your body and feel connection, feel gravity pulling you down and holding you. And, what does that feel like? Is there safety there? To
Yes,
me,
exactly.
there's such a benefit to that, especially before you're going to instruct them and hold space for them, like blasting off into this, much more
Yeah,
dysregulated,
yeah.
possibly, kind of space where they're leaving their body. It's so key. And I love what you're talking about in terms of the orientation, which is a somatic practice that I do as well. And, I've worked with my therapist on. And one thing about the orientation that's been interesting for me is, and I'm still kind of, I still am scratching my head about it a little bit sometimes because of COVID. I've done quite a lot of my therapy, over, online rather than being in somebody's office. And so, literally the spot that I sit in, and the room that I'm in, where I'm doing a lot of healing and I'm doing a lot of expansion, um, is a space where I also experienced a lot of trauma. And so sometimes coming out of that space, there's this beautiful mixture of like, yes, here's this environment that I've cultivated and there's wonderful things in it. And I'm also in this space where I experience this trauma. And sometimes I think, well, I wonder what it would be like. Maybe I should move or do this in a different room and see
Yeah,
how this would be different,
yeah,
because that orientation, sometimes there's like this sort of mixture of things that come in.
yeah,
But
totally.
so, just what you shared made me kind of question that, made me like ponder, like, maybe I should try this in a different,
That's a
um,
good that's a good point actually to be more intentional when we do online therapy sessions as a receiver sort of
yeah,
as to where we actually do them and to
yeah,
maybe not do them at the desk where we work every day or
right.
have like a dedicated space. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I like that.
And, just, yeah, the, it's hard to put into words for me, like how influential, how game changing somatic work has been. And even, like, hearing you share about your experience, like in the beginning, just being like, oh, like, are we just doing this thing again? And how somatic awareness develops, like I remember feeling like I had gotten to this place where I was like, maybe I'm done with this, because I feel like we do the same thing all the time. And it's gone from like, well, I feel something in my stomach to, oh, I can tell colors, I can tell shapes, I can tell a difference. Like I know that there's a difference between if I'm feeling something that I've been carrying since I was 4, as opposed to
Mhm.
something from when I was 13 or 16 or in my
Mhm.
30s. Like those have different somatic feelings to me, and I'm starting to be able to differentiate from that. But going
Mm.
from that to being like, okay, is this all there is? To, well, we don't just have to focus on the trauma and like on the sort of the negative stuff. Like, what are the resources that you have to experience joy and experience
Mm.
calm and safety? And like, what can you do to anchor that, to sit in that space, to recognize it, so that when you feel it, you can like actually like almost accentuate it, breathe into it, go a little bit
Mhm.
deeper into it.
Mhm.
That has been a huge game changer to me. And I'm like, I'm so glad I didn't quit when I felt like I had gotten through the trauma, in air
Yeah.
quotes, like
Yeah.
where, because there's a whole nother layer to that. and
Yes.
and I think that's that interoception, right, that you were mentioning as well, like just
Yeah, it's
getting,
like
yeah,
as I look at the screen here and where we're recording this, it says it's recording in 720p right now, right? It's literally going from like this pixelated sort of way of perceiving our bodies to experiencing our bodies in full HD, high definition. It's like, wow, there's all these details, right, that I just never saw and felt before. And suddenly they're here. And that's so fascinating to me as well, as to how much more sensitive we can become, and how fascinating living in full HD is when you're actually present in your body and not floating somewhere out there,
Yeah, and even, like I think the podcast is a great example for me. There's times where I feel very grounded and in control, and like I feel a certain way in my body. And then there's other times where I feel a lot of, I don't want to say anxious, because I tend to associate anxiety with like kind of a negative thing, or like where I want to change it. But where I'm sitting there and I'm noticing these different sensations happening in my body. I think some of that for me is like, there are certain people like yourself that like I really admire, and there's like a part of me that wants to do really well, and like wants you to like me, and like wants to be accepted maybe, and the way that expresses itself through the body. I had a podcast that I did earlier this season with somebody that I really admired, and I was like, wow, I can't believe this person is on my podcast. Like I'm making it, like this is to me, it was like a step up. And I started to notice, like the hour before we got on the call, I started to feel this anxiety and this nervousness in my body, that I was like, okay, I've done like 40 episodes at this point. I know what I usually feel like when I do a podcast. Why am I feeling like this? And instead of like pushing it away, I just took a couple of minutes to just sit with it and be like, what is this? Like what's happening here?
Yeah.
And that's where I came to, was like, wow, like, okay, I feel really excited, and I feel kind of nervous, because like I feel like this person is sort of like a big podcaster, and so like I really want to like impress them and do well, and it kept building as the moment to get on the call with them approached. And then before we hit record, and I was sitting there and I was just like this ball of nervous energy, and I can feel some activation even talking about it right now, but instead of doing what I normally would do, which is just like, let me keep this inside, let me try to suppress it, let me try to just power through it, I shared it with them. I said, you know what, before we hit record, like I just want to voice this. Like,
Nice.
I feel really, really nervous right now. And I don't know if it's because I'm talking with you and I just admire you so much. And it completely diffused the situation, because they didn't like laugh at me or be like, oh, get over it. They were very empathetic and very, they shared with me like, oh yeah, like I've been on podcasts like that where I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm talking to this person. And, it really helped me kind of ground and settle into a much more regulated state. And so there's just having that somatic awareness is completely transforms the way that we experience life, and that
so
we
much.
experience different situations, because just having that awareness like allows us, okay, let me just slow down, let me breathe into this.
I can
Instead
so
of
relate.
when we're not aware of it, like we might get into situations where we're either trying to cope with it in these weird ways,
Mm-hmm.
or we're just not even present to what's
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah.
So, it's like we're like, to use your analogy, it's like we're like looking through an old TV screen, with the snow and
You can
everything.
barely see anything.
Right. Instead of this HD beautiful picture that,
Yeah.
we have the ability to
Yeah.
relate to and to live in.
Yeah. Yeah, I can so relate to what you just shared because I just had this experience yesterday. And I mean, it's so fascinating having done all sorts of, talks and podcasts and workshops and I mean, endless. And yet, I still struggle with that myself sometimes. And yes, and it actually also depends on where I am in my cycle, I notice. But yesterday I also still have this actually when I do my Instagram lives, and which I started again last week, and I have one in an hour and a half or so. But for one, I'm always nervous beforehand, and I always use my breath and somatic practice to regulate myself. But at the same time, um, really digging into what's underneath that. And yesterday was one of those days where I had this again, and I was so conscious of what was happening, especially afterwards. Not so much before, afterwards, after this thing that I gave and I gave this talk, whatever. And then afterwards, as I hung up, and first I went for a walk, and that was really good because I could walk off these sympathetic activating energies, right, that were still running in my body. And my mind knew it went really well. This was really good. People loved it. Feedback was great. Sweet. However, there's something in my body somatically that did not believe that. It doesn't matter why it's not believing it. It just kept on triggering these sensations that made me stay stuck in my mind and keep rehashing and just ruminating. I should have said that. And what did people think when I was telling this story? And man, maybe I shouldn't have said this one thing. And it just kept on going and going and going. And then eventually, as I was sitting with that, and I realized that it's the thoughts are the thoughts. I don't have to believe what's going on here. What's way more important is to stay in the level of my body and connect to that charge, connect to that activation. Because, right, I mean, what rumination does and overthinking and just, over and over thinking about the same thing is that it keeps us stuck up here and it disconnects us from our bodies. And it's so hard to break through that, I find. Still sometimes when I'm stuck up here, I forget. I'm like, oh, wait, I don't actually need to stay stuck up here. I don't need to believe what's going on up here. What's actually way more important is to drop deeper, go into my body, see where the charge is, the activation. What am I sensing here? What's going on? And then just stay with that and track that charge and be with that. And then and that's what I did. And there was tears coming up a little bit, and I could just feel the release. And then I realized, wow, okay, it's not the thoughts that are what need my attention at all, because they would just keep running and running. They're so hard to fucking control. It's what's in our bodies. And if I just stay with that, then the thoughts will take care of themselves. They will calm down. And I can use my breath as a facilitator to connect back to my body, to create a safer space in my body to be with that charge, right? Instead of, and that's what a lot of people ask me, and maybe you too, it's like, can breathwork heal my depression? Is there a breathing practice I can do when I'm angry to not be angry anymore? I'm like, hold on a second here. This is not about not wanting something. This is not about using the breath to push something away and to make something go away and to not feel something. This is not about that. I find breathwork, and I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding out there, because yes, the breath is the remote control for our nervous system. So yes, we can change our state, but not to the expense of our authentic emotional expression. And I think a lot of times breathwork can be used as emotional bypassing. Oh, I feel angry, or I feel fear, I feel sadness. Let me just use this breathing practice, and so I don't have to feel that, right? So I can shift my state. And so eventually breathwork becomes a coping practice rather than something that helps us really explore what's underneath the anxiety, the anger, the depression, the sadness, the grief. And so that's something that is really important to me, I think, as a breathworker, to communicate is I don't make anything go away. No emotion, no experience. I use the breath as a way to make it, to make your body a safer place to be with what's there. And for that, I find breathing practices are beautiful and amazing. And yes, it can be an amazing daily practice. But so yeah, I find that connection between the breathing practice. And I also, yesterday, that's what I used. I did a bit of humming, extended my out breath, and so that I could feel a bit more grounded. And that made it easier for me to then be with that charge, and then to let the tears come. And then a few minutes later, it was done. It doesn't take, hours. Sometimes it's a matter of minutes, depending. Sometimes longer, but yeah. So I love that combination. I love your share because I think it's so human, to feel activated before an interview with someone that you really admire, or to afterwards, that part of us that's always wants to do things perfectly, and to be good enough for others, and to feel that we might suffer, like this part of us that unconsciously feels we might experience disconnection, right, and separation because we didn't perform well enough. Like, it's so human, right? And to take a moment or two or three and just be with that part somatically is huge. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that about your experience. And I love what you just said. What I heard was, using the breath and these different practices to have curiosity about what's happening in the body rather than accepting or rejecting, these different feelings based on how pleasant they feel at the time, just really being curious and accepting about that full spectrum of the human experience, and having the tools and the resources to experience them, and to work with them rather than being in this dualistic state of like, oh, this feels good, I just want to stay here, and oh, this feels unpleasant, I just want to get the heck away from it because it doesn't feel safe, it doesn't feel comfortable. So
Building
I appreciate
capacity,
that.
right? I think that's what it's all about. Building capacity in our nervous system, in our bodies, to be with the uncomfortable, the inconvenient, right? And on the other hand, also building capacity for joy at the same time, and pleasure, right? And so I think it goes both ways too.
Yeah, I think that's such a good word, and I love that you brought it up. Thank you, because you and I did a breath coaching session about, I guess, 5 or 6 months ago, and one of the biggest takeaways from that session for me, because I was like, okay, what should I do? I was having a lot of anxiety. My heart rate was kind of going out of control, and it was really scary. And at first, I was like a little bit puzzled because you said, well, and I'm like, well, I do these slow breathing types of techniques, the heart coherence or, box breathing. And why isn't it helping? And the thing that I took away from it that you shared with me was, it's not just about doing those practices. It's about bringing in the really slowing the breath down so that you're building that capacity within the nervous system, like getting to this place of where it feels a little bit uncomfortable. Like it feels like I need to breathe a little bit. And that to me was such a game changer. It's not just breathing in for 5, breathing out for 5. It's slowing the breath down to this place of in the beginning, it really was uncomfortable. It was like, oh, I need to breathe. But then noticing that capacity building as I continue to do the practice. And then seeing it, like, oh, I can track this. Wow. Like I can see it having an effect. Not only can I feel it in my body and my nervous system, but I can see the data, like, which is so great, right? That we have these tools that we can use. Yeah. So I really appreciate that about your approach and what you teach.
Cool. That's wonderful. Yeah. I mean, we can use practices like coherence breathing, box breathing, whatever they're called, and use them in a way where they make us feel nice and calm for a little while we're doing them, and maybe for a little bit afterwards. But what a lot of people end up doing still is, when they're not instructed properly, is they might still be over breathing and just literally breathing too much air. And what we tend to do is, when we slow down our breathing, so let's say, on average, let's say you're breathing at a rate of someone with anxiety, maybe even panic attacks, stressful life. It could be anywhere up to 18, 20, even more breaths per minute, right? I see that. And so then I ask them to slow down their breath to 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out, for example, right? Is where I would start them out. So that's 7.5 breaths per minute. That is less than half of what they would normally breathe. And so what we tend to do when we slow down our breathing in this way is that we increase the volume of breath. And that is quite natural, right? When we're not instructed differently. But what ends up happening is that we actually end up breathing more air. We're breathing more volume of air, which in turn has the effect that we're overbreathing. And what overbreathing means is that we're off-gassing too much carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is super important to deliver oxygen to the cells, to our brain, to our muscles and organs. So it's not just a waste gas. And at the same time, overbreathing really is a signal to our nervous system in the long run, when we're doing it as a chronic functional breathing pattern, that we're in a stress response. And so overbreathing in most cases also coincides with chest breathing, mouth breathing, especially at night, snoring, sleep apnea, and faster breathing in general. And so these practices, even though they're meant well by, the pranayama teacher in a yoga class and whatnot, they usually don't really have a long-lasting effect on the breathing pattern itself. And so this is probably what you have found. And so when we bring in an extra dimension, the dimension of light and reduced breathing, meaning we do the same practice, let's say 4 in, 4 out, we're using our diaphragm to breathe. So, and we're not doing belly breathing, we're doing diaphragmatic breathing, right? So that means it's not just my belly that's moving, but it's like the lower 2 or 3 ribs and the sides and the back that are moving, because that's where our diaphragm's at. And that in combination with the coherence breathing and the nose breathing, plus reducing the volume of breath. So we're working up to a little bit of an air hunger, right? It feels like I'm not breathing enough air. And it might feel like what you were saying, it's a little bit uncomfortable maybe in the beginning. But once we get used to it, it also trains interoception, actually, because you got to find that sweet spot, right? And that takes a while. And in the beginning, we're just like stumbling around and like, well, where is that edge of air hunger that's meant to be tolerable and comfortable, but a little bit uncomfortable as well. And so eventually when we find that and we integrate that into our coherence breathing practice, it's the most effective practice out there. I mean, we don't need much else, I find, to regulate our nervous system, to improve our breathing patterns. And so when we start to do this practice on a regular basis, it helps to generally, turn our breathing in everyday life into a pattern that's more functional, that's more optimal. In the long run, we end up breathing slower in daily life. And the effects of doing our practice on the mat will eventually have an effect to our lives off the mat, and that means a more regulated nervous system. So that's why I keep saying we don't need a super complex breathing practice. Just got to know the right buttons and levers to push and pull and turn on our remote control.
I also feel like that's a good reason, or a good sort of, this is why it's so important sometimes, especially if we're in a really dysregulated space, to work with a coach, because there's so many different things online, and if we're not as educated about the power of the breath and the nervous system like you are, and I would like to think that I know a little bit, not as much as you, but I think there's sometimes like a danger of like, oh well, I'm just breathing, like how crazy could this be, and
Yeah,
we were talking
it's
about it
just
before.
breathing.
Right, we were talking about it before we hit record, about sort of the accessibility to really activating breaths, especially on YouTube. That's what's sort of getting the views, right? Is like, oh, have this DMT
That's what is
experience
getting
or
the views. Yeah, for
Kundalini
sure.
experience. And without I definitely have had that experience, and I've had that experience with clients. I can think of someone that I was in an integration circle with, and they shared that over 25 years of working with psychedelics and different altered states of consciousness, the most intense experience they had was with holotropic breathing. And actually, it was very traumatic for them because they weren't expecting it. They weren't sort of coached before the experience that this is what could happen. And then there was no aftercare integration. So they were left in this sort of traumatized, overstimulated state. And 25 years later, they were still trying to figure it out and like work with it.
Yeah.
And so there's that. And then I think on the other hand, you might have somebody that's very dysregulated, and they see something on Instagram or something like that where it's like, extend your exhale and you'll feel better, you'll regulate your nervous system. Well, that's absolutely true. And maybe for you in this space and time and area of regulation to your nervous system, you might need something a little bit more hands-on, or a little bit more personalized to where you're at. So I think that working with a coach is so key if this is something that you really want to learn how to use as a resource. And I can say that even doing one session with you had so much benefit to me in my own practice, and being able to not only, like you said, have the difference and the experience within my daily practice, but like off of the mat as well, and like seeing the benefits out in the rest of my life.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I totally agree. And at the end of the day, I always say that every human, because we're all on one healing journey or another, right? Or whatever you want to call it. And we all have our own unique lock that unlocks the door to our healing or integration, whatnot. And so, but that lock requires a different set of keys. And we all have a different lock because we all have different stories, different nervous systems, different biographies and traumas and whatnot. And so we all require a different set of keys to open this door. But I think one key that should be on everyone's key chain should be breath work in one way or another, or working with the breath and establishing a functional breathing pattern. And then, I would probably also add something like somatic psychotherapy, and a good healthy anti-inflammatory diet and daily movement. And, there's obviously certain things that I would prescribe to anyone who's struggling in life. But I also think that in many ways, breathwork is sometimes regarded as like this panacea, as kind of like this thing that just kind of heals everything, and you just need a breathwork session or 10 and that's it. And so either people go in with these really huge expectations and then either are disappointed or they go in a nervous system state and they do practices that they shouldn't be doing. People who are constantly operating in a sympathetic fight or flight mode and are way too much in a stress response and adrenalized on a daily basis, I don't think they should be doing Wim Hof breathing every day. And they probably also shouldn't do too much of holotropic style or neurodynamic breath work. They should first get their daily functional breathing pattern in order and have a nice, safe, regulating breathing practice in place before diving headfirst into a 60 or 90-minute breathing practice, for example. And that's why I combine the both worlds, because I find so much, I found so much healing in both of these worlds, the transformational style breathwork and the more regulating breathwork and functional breathing. And so I think, yes, breathwork it should be a very individualized practice, because we all have a different nervous system. We all need something that might be a little bit different. And yet, yes, I also run these sessions on Instagram, and they're all for nervous system regulation. And I run monthly transformational style breathwork sessions, the deep dives, and those are group sessions as well. And running them in a way where, I have a long list of contraindications, so do you, right? And so we really want to make sure that we guide people safely into sessions whose nervous system is up to the task, and also in a way where we create a safe container for everybody's nervous system, and that we offer guidance and also instructions for integration in a way that's nervous system informed, trauma informed, and that we don't leave people alone. And I think that is something that a YouTube video promising you a big fat DMT release and, riding with the unicorns in universe, that is not something that is very trauma informed. And that is something where breathwork gets a bad reputation. And also looking at some, breathworkers out there who get trained in a weekend to guide people into these, expanded states of awareness where, into these transformational experiences. And I just don't think that that's very safe. And so breathwork is still a wild west, right? As you know. And there are a couple of sort of regulating bodies trying to standardize this space in a way, but it's really hard. And so there is so much breathwork going on out there, and people who don't know much about how the breath and how the nervous system works, they're just like, well, it's just the breath, right? What can go wrong? I'm like, whoa, so much can go wrong. And so I'm trying really hard to educate people, and also in our teacher training, to be more conservative in a way that is, we still want to offer people a transformational experience, but in a way that is trauma informed and nervous system informed. And
Does your teacher training, is it a combination of the transformational and the functional, or does it
Yes,
lean more on
yes.
one? Okay.
No, it's both. And so my partner, she has more than 10 years of experience as a breath worker. She was trained she trained with Dr. Judith Kravitz, transformational breath back then. And then I come in with a lot of the nervous system stuff, the functional breathing, the regulating practices. And so we combine the both worlds and really, we set a pretty high standard in terms of who we end up certifying. And because we really want to make sure that people are confident in how they guide people safely, and that they do their own inner work. And so, in the beginning, it's a lot about just doing exactly that, setting up your own practice and cleaning up your own inner, I don't want to say mess, but just exploring all your shadow parts before learning how to guide people into theirs. And we're extending the training as well. Currently it's 7 months, and it's probably going to be 9 months or 12 months very soon, because I think that's what it takes to really become a truly trauma-informed, nervous system-informed breathwork facilitator and breath coach. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm curious about that myself. I think the first cohort that you did, was that just in German?
Yeah, so the first one was in German. We're currently in cohort number 2, which is also in German, but next year we're it looks like starting a cohort in English as well. So that's the plan anyway. But yeah, it's a lot of fun training people, and at the same time it's challenging because we're really trying to set a whole new standard in breathwork, and hopefully that will ripple out. And that, if there's someone trying to decide, am I going to do like a weekend training or a 3-week or 4-week training and spend a few $100, maybe, or $1,000, or should I do this training that's 9 months long or 12 months long and that costs a lot more? Hopefully that decision will be clear in the future. But there's still so much work to be done, because it's a wild, wild west out there. Yeah.
What do you think has been like the biggest thing that you've learned doing teacher training and certification?
What do you mean, running them or doing my own, participating?
Compared to being a participant, and then now you're facilitating and training other teachers.
Well, I feel like I get a lot of joy out of nerding out really hard on the breath and the nervous system and physiology and trauma, and that gives me a lot of joy. And at the same time, what I and also my partner, who I'm running this with, what we needed to learn is, for one, setting boundaries and really finding that middle path of being relational and authentic in who we are in our own, being still in our own journeys through life as a human, and being friends with the people that we train. And at the same time, because I don't like these hierarchies of I'm the leader and I know everything, and so kind of leveling the field, but at the same time, still being the authority in terms of training them and teaching them and finding and having boundaries. And because currently we're training 52 people, and you need a lot of processes in place and deadlines, and otherwise things just turn into chaos really quickly, and people just do whatever they want, or they don't show up. And so it's been a steep learning curve, in a way that organizing it so that every year it gets easier to teach this, and with less administrative or organizational hassle, so that we can really just focus on teaching the content and making sure that it's a fun experience, because I don't just want to teach something to teach it. I want people to have a really good time. And the other thing was, more and more, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, as I was sharing about this experience from yesterday, my perfectionism and the expectations that I set myself on how I want to perform and how I want others to perceive my performance. And that's something that it's my life story, I guess. Yeah.
Mine too.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of, sharing content, sharing practices, would you be comfortable with offering a short practice that the audience could follow along with?
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
Totally. Should I do it now?
Yeah, sounds good.
Can right into it? Okay, cool. So yeah, let's do something nice and simple. Just first, connecting to our breathing and connecting to diaphragmatic breathing, and then doing a few rounds of coherence breathing and see how that feels for us. Okay. So find a comfortable upright position, the straight spine, and I invite you to close your eyes for this if you like. And then going inside and taking your awareness from the external to the internal, making sure your belly is nice and soft and that your jaw is nice and relaxed. Your lips are softly closed and your tongue is resting on the roof of the mouth behind the front teeth. The teeth are not touching. And you just feel the air coming in and out of your nose. And just focus your attention on the feeling of your breath as it's flowing in and out of your little nostrils. There's no need to try to breathe or change your breath. Just feeling the air, relaxing your shoulders a bit more, really sinking into your seat and letting your breath do what it naturally does. And then place one hand on your chest and one hand on your sternum, your stomach region above your belly button. And just notice what moves as you breathe softly and gently in and out through your nose. Just connecting with your hands to your breath, having this haptic feedback. Just noticing. And then I invite you to place your hands on either sides of your lower ribs and begin breathing into your hands so that with every in-breath, your lower ribs and belly expand a bit. And with every out-breath, your lower ribs and your belly relax again and deflate. Breathing into your hands, belly, lower ribs expand. And exhaling, lower ribs and belly come back in. Nice. Just anchoring your breath in this way in your body. And if you like, you can take your hands back down to your lap. Just let your breath naturally flow. In a moment, we're going to move into a few rounds of slow coherence breathing to the count of 4 seconds in and 4 seconds out, while we're engaging our diaphragm that sits just right underneath our lower ribs. So let's begin together after your next exhale. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, in, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, in, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, in, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4. And then keep breathing like this, finding your own rhythm. If you need to come down to 3 seconds in and 3 seconds out, you can. You can also increase to 5 seconds. But what's more important than the count is that you're not taking in bigger breaths, even though we're slowing down our breathing rate. So we don't want to compensate slower breathing rate with bigger volume breaths. So see if you can find this edge of a little bit of an air hunger, where you feel like you'd like to breathe in more air, but you're not. But you can still stick to your breathing rate. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. With every in-breath, the belly and lower ribs expand a little. With every out-breath, they come back in. And keep the breath moving like this for a couple more rounds. Nice. And then let the breath go, let the counting go, coming back to your breath's natural state. Just coming back to stillness and noticing any shift in your physiology. Just noticing how your body feels after just a few minutes of connecting to your breathing and slowing down your breathing. Let's take one last conscious, slow breath in through the nose all the way up. Pause for a second. And then exhale slowly out the mouth. Nice. And when you're ready, you can gently open your eyes and come back to your space. Look around the room, taking in your environment. Welcome back.
Thank you. That was wonderful. So it's always, even with my daily practice, it's always so amazing to notice how quickly we can change that state with such a short amount of effort.
Yeah. Simple does it.
Yeah. Such a beautiful practice and beautiful way to connect to ourselves. Slow down a little bit.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you offering that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
It's been so lovely talking with you.
Yeah, it really has been. Thank you so much. This was great.
Yeah, thank you. So you mentioned a couple of things. You mentioned your Instagram live sessions and the monthly sessions. Where should people go to connect with you or to learn more about your work?
Hmm. Yeah, I'm mostly active on Instagram. So that's breathwork.alchemy. And you can find everything else in the link in my bio there. And you can also hop on over to my website, breathworkalchemy.co. I also have a foundations course, Breathwork and Nervous System Foundations, that would explain a lot of the things that we spoke about today in a lot more detail, and it comes with a lot of different breathing practices. And otherwise, yeah, catch me on Instagram. I do weekly live sessions, and yeah, and I run sort of monthly, bi-monthly deep dive sessions as well. And yeah, would love to connect. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to make it to one of your transformational sessions too, and drop in
Yeah, right.
and connect in that way.
Cool.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you so much, Conni. I really appreciate you sharing your experience and wisdom and practice with us. It's been so wonderful. And like I said at the top of the show, I'm really feel grateful to be connected to you and to have you as a friend. It's been
Yeah,
such
same,
a
same.
such a wonderful gift that Michael Stone has
Yes.
given me.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, same. So much fun chatting with you. And let's do this again. Part
Yeah.
3 or 4.
Anytime.
I don't know what.
Absolutely, for sure. So yeah,
Cool.
definitely recommend if you're listening or watching this on YouTube to connect to Conni's work. It's been super influential in my life. Really transformed my breath practice this year in some really wonderful ways, and can't recommend her enough. And I hope that, doing this practice or listening to this conversation has inspired you to learn more. The breath and breath work is such a wide open field, and there's so many different ways that you can go, and really just can't recommend teachers like Conni enough. So whatever practice you're doing, I hope this conversation inspired you to do some more of it, or check out, her work, check out, learn a little bit more about what you can actually accomplish with your breath, and to keep practicing, because practicing really is the vital point. So until next time, my friends, keep doing that practice, and we'll see you soon on the Vital Point.